All right, good evening, everybody. We're going to conclude our special two-part exploration of Pirkei Avot's, um, let's call it, endorsement of the value of work. The main focus we had last week was on Shemaya's call for us to, quote, love work, unquote, ehovas malacha. Although, interestingly, he couples that with hating authority. So maybe, it's a good way to get teenagers motivated. Yeah! Authority sucks, but do your homework. Um, but what we were focusing on, though, is actually a way to find love in work, to find ways for self-expression, for self-valuation in what it is and how it is we're able to contribute to the world. So part of that is the work, what do we call avodas hakodesh, right? The conventional work of prayer, Torah study, community, things like that. But also ways to find the Kodesh in the Avoda, ways to find holiness in your work life, in also the ways in which we contribute in labor in ways that aren't recognized by society, at least in terms of wages, such as housework, rearing children, things like that. All kinds of worthy and holy things that we do in our lives, and Pirkei Avot gives us a lens into how to, I would say, recover that value. Today we're going to talk about, I would say, maybe the psychological context of what it is to buy in on how valuable and essential work is. Namely, we're going to be looking at what contemporary sociologists and hot take writers call burnout culture. If we accept a theological premise that everything we do is meaningful and the work that we do has some kind of sacred purpose, then how are we able to keep that in some kind of healthy balance and not become overwhelmed either by the demands that we feel are put on us by, the transcendent value of everything that we're doing, or, the ways in which, the lines between home and work and things like that can become pretty blurry. It's the, I guess you can facetiously call it the Santa Claus problem, right? If he knows when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake, then when are you able ever to have a sense of healthy balance in your life, right? If all of work is holy and God values everything that we're doing, then it seems like it's quite likely for us to feel overtaxed or perhaps overextended. So with that in mind, we're going to be looking at the immensely prescient and insightful comments that we find further in the Pirkei Avos. So let's dive in. Can everyone see that okay? Great.
That's
So back to Pirkei Avos. Rabbi Tarfon, who when I was in middle school, when I first heard of this guy, I always called him Rabbi Carphone. But nowadays, nobody has car phones, so not a great joke, I guess. Rabbi Tarfon Omer, Hayom Katsar, and I'm going to say this in the Hebrew, and I want you to just pay attention to this, the immense pithy and terse elegance that this teaching has. Hayom Katsar, v'hamalacha mruba, v'hapoalim atzelim, v'sachar harbe, v'al habayit dochek. The day is short. The work is expansive. Your coworkers are lazy. The paycheck's pretty good. And the boss is knocking at the door. Okay, so before we get into the Perushim and the like, that's the mushal, right? If you were to say what the mushal is, what's the analogy, what's the parabolic framing Rabbi Tarfon's using to help us understand our spiritual lives? What's the metaphor he's using?
the metaphor of a work day.
Yeah, a work day, good. And it seems like he's gesturing to kind of being a day laborer, right? So let's figure out what the nimshal is. So what's the day that is short? Is it our day? Is it what?
Our
life.
lifetime?
Could be your lifespan, sure, right? We're here but a vanishing blink, right? It could be the day, though, too, in terms of, Judaism has daily tasks that we are required to do. It could be our life. It could be other spans, perhaps the task that's set before us. The work is great. What's the work that is great that we think? Or what's the work that's so great?
Studying Torah, following mitzvot.
Okay, great. What else is so expansive?
Also our connections to others and how we treat them.
Great. So we have mitzvot ben adam l'makom, mitzvot ben adam l'chaviro, right? Mitzvot that we do between us and God, mitzvot we do between us and our fellow human beings. Great. Who are the coworkers? Name names.
I've worked with these guys. I know them.
Don't actually name names. This is being recorded and not just in heaven.
Is it other Jews?
And I was married to one, but another story.
All right. Yeah, I mean, this is like the sassiest part of Rabbi Tarfon's teaching. You know, I wonder in some ways, actually, this is less descriptive and more poetic in some ways, right? Like, imagine a situation you're in which the task is great, the clock's running down, your teammates are not at your side, but the reward is great, and the pressure's on, right? The boss is knocking at the door. I mean, like a lot of mushals, like it doesn't like always like necessarily hash out, right? Like, who's Rabbi Tarfon thinking of when he says the po'alim atzilim? Unclear. But like let's imagine you're in that kind of situation. Yeah, Susie.
Do you think it's like an analogy of like sort of society and like, people trying to get away with, as little as they can for as much as they can?
Sure.
Like bargaining and all this stuff and how they sell their wares and things like.
Yeah, sure.
The bad business practices that we're always warned against in the Torah.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite interesting because, like, I mean, it seems like they're your coworkers, right? So, like, is he throwing shade at his fellow rabbis? I don't think so, per se.
No,
Is he?
more
But if he's throwing, if he's like, if he's like dissing the, the like workaday schmoes, like they aren't his coworkers then.
But no, I don't think it's about co-workers so much as like how people in society are functioning and how they're not.
Sure, but you're one of the po'alim, right? I mean, maybe he's saying you're lazy too, and you got to get your you have to get your act in gear.
Probably, yeah.
Shape up or ship out. All right, and the paycheck is pretty decent. Meaning, what's the paycheck here? Okay, so my mysterious sibling in the background says Olam Haba, who will join us at some point.
Yeah, almost done.
So yes, maybe the world to come, right? Like the balancing the scales in the afterlife. What else? How else can we understand schar harbe? What's the reward that's waiting?
Even the schar here that we get on earth.
Okay, yes, schar mitzvah, as the Gemara says, right?
Yeah.
The sense of meaningful activities that we perform as coordinated and choreographed by God, for sure. It's a meaningful life that one can have if one is diligently working at meaningful tasks. Great. And last but not least, the boss is insistent. All right, the major domo, not the major domo, probably the guy who employs the major domo is insistent. Who's the boss?
Hashem.
Hashem. Okay, that I'm not going to brook any other. No more interpretations. That one is usually I'm not somebody who says no, that's the right answer. But in this case, I'd be very troubled if we had other answers to that nimshal. So let's look at Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah, I think I've mentioned before, is famous he's a medieval rabbi from Gironde. He wrote a lot. He's a very important commentary on the Talmud, but his two kind of most famous works are Sharei Tshuva, which is an analysis of repentance, which is a very famous book that people often study during Elul, and his commentary on Pirkei Avot. So, drawing from that here, he says, Rabbi Tarfon Omer Yom Katzar Malacha Merubah. He says, Rabbi Tarfon says, the day is short, but the work is great. Or when he says great, it doesn't mean like great. It means like it's very big. Hayom katsar, elu yimotav shehem katsarim keneged haTorah. So he actually sees it as entirely a relative measure. He's saying days are short relative to the Torah. Like, i.e., the Torah is so great, it's so expansive, that anything is vanishingly, shrinkingly small in connection to it. You know, the Torah stretches on forever. How could you ever have a day that could encompass the entirety of Torah? That Torah is miruba, aruka, me'eretz, midah, rechava, minayam, right? It is greater and long and more measured than the earth. It is wider than the sea. Ve'ein yored lasof, and no one can plumb its full depths. No one can descend to the end. It's quoting a pasuk there of Ezosh Amru. Otam arba'im yom she'aman Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom b'har Sinai lo yashan. And that's why, says the Medrash, the 40 days and 40 nights that Moshe Rabbeinu was on Har Sinai, he didn't sleep when he was receiving the Torah. So how do we take that in terms of the transcendent value of Torah? You know, that it is greater than one could ever accomplish, greater than one could ever measure. Is that empowering, disempowering, exciting, scary?
Exciting. It sets like a kind of a mission for us to learn it, to master it. It's a lifetime mission.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something that's both immensely emboldening, but also at the same time humbling, right? Because you ever think or would claim to have a comprehensive knowledge of Torah, you are, according to Rabbeinu Yonah, lying, right? You can't. It's impossible. I mean, okay, Moshe, fine. Moshe is Moshe. No one's like Moshe, right? Mi Moshe la Moshe, ein haya kamo Moshe. That's what's said about Moses. That's what's said about Moses Maimonides. And then when Rav Moshe Feinstein, who was the Gadol Ador of the mid 20th century, says Mi Moshe la Moshe la Moshe. From Moses to Moses to Moses, there was no one like Moses. So the point is, if you're named Moses, then you got a good leg up on everybody else. But Torah is so expansive that there's no way for anyone to have comprehensive knowledge of it. Thus, it is it's emboldening. You know, for you, it's a mission statement, as Lauren just said. You know, just like learn. But on the other hand, it also is appropriately humbling that one could never really claim a fully satisfactory knowledge of Torah. So it's really, in a way, maybe even not about knowledge, but really it's about learning. Right? It's about the practice of learning. It's about the habit of learning. It's about the commitment of learning, more than it's actually about knowing. Now, you know, certain nerds, professionals do need to know certain things when it comes to Torah, because rabbis, teachers, etc., need to guide people through halachic questions and things like that, sure. But Torah is more than just a Q&A book. It's not about having the right answers. Torah is about an unfolding relationship, a horizon that you never reach. It's a lifelong commitment. And that's something it's such a powerful thing, right? That Torah is not something you accomplish. Torah is not something you complete. You know, the first thing we do on Simchas Torah when we finish the Torah, we start reading the Torah again, right? Not just that, but actually there's a special way you lift the Torah when you do Hagbah on Simchas Torah. Usually you just kind of lift it up straight. On Simchas Torah, you actually twist it so it turns around and the people can see it, and the back of the cloth is to you. Why? Because it says in the Pirkei Avot, Hafochba v'fochba dekula ba. Right, turn it over and turn it over, because everything is inside of it. So we turn over the Torah, the show, and also the other answer says the Minhagim is that it's to confuse Satan, because Satan would say, they finished the Torah, they're done with it, they're done with you, God. And we confuse Satan by doing Hagbah the wrong way, because I don't know, Satan's very attached to the right way to do Hagbah, I guess. And then we immediately then afterwards start the Torah again, right? We need that kind of like quick breath so we can take out the second Torah. And very beautifully, actually, the last letter of the Torah is, what the last word of the Torah is? Yisrael, right? The last letter of which is Lamed. And the first word of Torah is? Bereshit. That was not a trick question. And the first letter of which is Bet. So Lamed. So once we finish the Torah, we had Lamed, and once we start the Torah, we read Bet, which makes the word Lamed Beis, which means heart. So every time we finish and start the Torah anew, it shows that this is a heartful relationship. This is a relationship about our hearts, our commitment to Torah. One level it's cute, and the other level I find actually quite moving. It's my approach in a nutshell. All right, Mashal Lamelech. A parable about a king. We always have parables about kings. She'amar la'avdai, who said to his servant, Madud Zahuvim Mikan Vi'ad Lamachar. Measure out gold coins from here to tomorrow, i.e., do it all night. V'chol mashe timdod yeshalcha, and everything that you count out will be yours. Okay? Eich yashein v'halo ba'ota shah yafsid kama v'kama. Would that, if someone came to you and said, okay, you have to count dollar bills, and all the dollar bills you count from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. tomorrow, you get to keep. I know you don't have dollar bills here. You get to count out loonies. And all the loonies that you count out from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. you get to keep. Would you sleep? No. Of course you wouldn't sleep. Yadoi. Because you would lose in the time that you slept, X amount of duck coins. Kach Amar Moshe. Im Ishan. So Moses said, when? Remember what the Midrash suggested was the framing of this teaching? Moses said to God when? Or in what context? Yeah. Loons aren't ducks. Wait. What did Moshe say? Or in what context did Moses say? How could I sleep, he says. Eich Ishan. Kama Margalios Midivrei Torah Afsid. How many pearls of Torah? How many gems of Torah? Right, will I lose? Right, so, Moses and God are having the first, all-night cram session, right? And God's like, okay, this is an incredibly unique experience you're having, Moses. You and I are just going to talk. I'm going to tell you everything that is important to know. How radical, right? How, energizing, how, a bolt into you, right, would that be? You would resist the gravity pull of tiredness. Right? You would do everything you could to be as alert and awake as possible. Al achas kama v'kama. All the more so, says the Medrash. Anu bal nitan shana le'enenav lu'afapenu t'numa. We cannot give sleep to our eyes, and we cannot allow our eyelids to flutter closed. So we started by saying that Moses is in this unique experience, right? Moses is having this immensely intimate, powerful, transcendent connection with God at Har Sinai. All 40 days, 40 nights, right? Moses stayed up. Transcended his bodily needs. Okay, but Moses is Moses, right? And then the Midrash says, no, Moses is the baseline. All the more so. You don't sleep. Never sleep. So we see this kind of dual, double-edged sword, right, of the meaningful life, right? On one hand, it's immensely empowering and energizing. Look how valuable work is. Torah is this unassailable object that can never be, fully scaled. It can never be fully assimilated, right? Something that will always exceed your grasp. But how exciting that is, right? The hunt is on. But on the other hand, right, if your whole life is constantly charged with the quest for meaning, and losing it means you lose out on something you perhaps cannot regain, then the potential consequence of that is something that's straining, overwhelming, right? So we have Rabbi Tarfon laying the mission, in Lauren's words, at our feet. But on the other hand, Rabbeinu Yonah, I don't think he's criticizing it per se, but he's laying out the implications of it. I don't think he's saying bad. I think he's saying, actually, this is amazing. You should do it. All chaskama v'kama. Be like Moses. Be even better. But I think the implications of his Perush is that, right, but here's something that then, if we let Rabbi Tarfon's analogy, parable, be the program by which we live our life, then you're always going to feel like resentful at your coworkers. You're always going to feel stressed out about your boss, breathing down your neck. Is it possible actually that this could, in an inverted way, end up actually ruining or straining your relationship with God, to see God as an insistent boss? I don't know about you, but that's not exactly the image I want of God. Yeah, I mean, the question of like whether health is, Sue says it's not healthy. It's true. I mean, but on the other hand, like the 20th century, 21st century is obsessed with health. Unclear health is actually all that good in some ways. But I mean, I kind of mean it in some ways, right? We live in a very therapeutic age in which it's about balance and health and things like that. But, I always wonder, is that a way of like flattening our lives in some ways, leveling out the peaks, bringing up the bringing out the depths. It's like, it's not healthy to like go through these like intense mood swings, I guess, but like it's also like immensely powerful to experience the full complement of feelings and the depths and the power that like being alive can entail. I'm not like anti-psychiatry. That's not what I'm saying. But just a gentle voice of maybe like a little bit of like a critical pushback, a little bit on the idolatry of health.
Sleeping for a month.
Huh?
You can't not sleep for a month.
Moses did. No, I was kidding. No. I mean, that's Moses. That's Moses. I mean, but here you call to mind like the image of other great people like the Vilna Gaon, right? Who like famously got like 2 hours of sleep, and he would study with his feet in an ice bath to make sure he would be awake, late into the night. There's a kind of like asceticism to this that is. Imagine being like a teenager your whole life, right? In the sense of like getting like totally obsessed with something and it keeping you up and you're just like totally devoted to it. I don't know, a teenager, but like, this is the kind of experience that learning in yeshiva when you're young, right? Or learning in seminary when you're young. It's a full body experience. And the call here is like, what if that weren't just a lark, before you entered the real world? What if actually you saw that as the way to live life, right? To juice life for all it's worth. Now, it's a powerful call, but yeah, again, the question of, I'm trying to hold these things in tension, right? Like I'm saying, like there is a health-oriented critique of the burnout culture and things like that. That's important to note, but I want to have that there, but I also want to have not just the seduction of this, but like the power of it, the romance of it, right? Of an obsessive life, right? Like a life, like you've fallen completely in love, right? And it's like it just fills your full self. Nowadays, like therapists will be like, you need to diversify your investments. That's a weird way of talking about people, right? People aren't investments. Like if someone's really important to you, they're really important to you. So what if God, Torah, was, you're a workaholic, but it came to Torah. That's the romance of it. So we're just going to put a pin in that, right? Now we're going to talk about how do we then acknowledge the immensity of the task, that learning Torah, and I want to say like not just learning Torah, but Avodas HaKodesh in the expansive way we talked about it last week. Both religious work, i.e. davening, learning, being part of a community, doing mitzvahs and things like that, yes, but also in the more general, maybe Hasidic sense of finding the holiness in the everyday, right? The way we do meaningful work, devote ourselves, apply ourselves, give effort, right, of our gifts and our time in ways that are meaningful. Okay, so how are we able to have a sense of how powerful and how needed that is, but on the other hand, to recognize given how immense it is, how expansive it is, to also be able to approach it with some sense of context. So let's move back. So let's go back to it's the following Mishnah. It's like a 1-2 punch. There's actually a few. I left a couple out because I wanted to like do more commentary stuff. But if you want to look at the original texts, the end of chapter 2, there's a few kind of reminiscences on this theme. So I encourage you to look at it in your spare time. All right. So who wants to read the next Mishnah? I'll take a step back. But it's also Rabbi Tarfon. So like to Rabbi Tarfon's credit, like on one hand he has this mushal of like the task is great. Your coworkers stink, and your boss is emailing you at 3 a.m. But on the other hand, he also is able to see the other side of it. Okay, so who wants to read this? Come on, don't make me volunteer somebody.
216?
216.
Okay.
Do it in Hebrew, though.
Oh, Bivrit? Okay.
Ivrit. Come on, Ivrit, Ivrit.
בסדר, ישר
More.
ניקוד, אין בעיה.
Okay.
הוא היה אומר, לא עליך המלאכה לגמור, ולא אתה בן חורין לבטל
Libatel.
להימנע.
It's in modern Hebrew it would be lihibatel.
לבטל.
Yeah, so it's the infinitive of the passive.
Okay. אם למדת תורה הרבה, נותנים לך שכר הרבה, ונאמן הוא בעל מלאכתך, שישלם לך שכר פעולתך, ודמתן שכרן של צדיקים לעתיד לבוא.
Okay, very well. So lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, lo alecha ligmor. Right. So I don't know if people know that song. I love that song. So this is where it comes from. So it's not on you to finish the task. And this is like one of the, like, if you're ever like doing anything like Jewish activism, right? You'll always see this teaching show up on postcards or whatever. It's not on you to finish the work, but you are also not free to be freed from it. Isn't that an interesting dialectic? It is not on you to finish the work, but you are not free to desist from it, to buttle it, neglect it. How do we take that? A very, I would say, a genuinely sophisticated and like mature sentiment. Like, how do you take that? What do you take it to mean?
I think it makes sense. Like you're not going to be able to complete it. It's not for you to finish, but you've got to work at it. You've got to at least try, and you've got to keep on working at it. It's a lifelong commitment, but you're not going to finish it. There's like, you're only human. There's only so much you can do.
Great. Other thoughts? Anyone say that we're not only human? I'm just kidding. No, what are some other reactions to this?
So it feels a little bit like the very first lesson where everything gets passed on from person to person. It's like you have to pick up where the other people left off and do as much as you can, and then the next people are going to pick up from you and keep doing the work.
That's a great callback. Great. So yeah, the very first mission of Pirkei Avot frames Torah as not as a, let's say, a sum total game, but rather gives you a framing in which you contextualize yourself within a project that spans beyond yourself. Right, your role, in that way it's like, okay, you receive Torah and you pass it on unchanged, right? Like a game of telephone. Like you're trying to do that. But here it's a little bit different in the sense that you receive the task of Torah, and your task is then to try to learn it, and I would even say continue it in a way that you can. Right, but maybe in a way only you. And then that's done by everybody, right? And from that kind of multi-frame picture, we're able to put a larger image together. In a way, like this is, I think Rabbi Tarfon's doing like a critique on himself. I don't mean like a criticism. I mean like he's taking what he said before and he's actually trying to like develop a more sophisticated approach to it, saying, in a way, why would you think it's on you to complete it? Just because the work is great doesn't actually mean all of the work is yours. You have a specific task, perhaps, and that is what you need to complete. And the coworkers being lazy, though, might imply that maybe like you need to take up their task sometimes too. That's possible. But if you're focused on how you can't finish it, then actually the work you're doing is the work of you, rather than you are at service of the work. Right? Is the work about you completing it? Or are you about the work getting done? Right? The kudos you might get, in a way, for completing the task needs to be secondary to the value of the task itself. So if you're primarily concerned about the fact that you can't finish it, then, I mean, maybe, I guess there's like a charitable reading and non-charitable reading. The non-charitable reading is that if you can't finish it, you don't want to do it, because it's not worth your time. The charitable reading of it, though, might be, you love this work, you recognize how valuable it is, thus you are committed to it, and the fact that you can't complete it makes you upset. You feel daunted by it, you feel overwhelmed by it, and thus, because of that, you might actually shrink away from doing it. I've felt both ways. I felt both annoyed that I'm not going to get the recognition I deserve, but I've also felt when I start doing something, I see how big it is, and I see what doing it the right way would look like, and I freak out because I'm like, I can't. There's so much I need to do, and it's taken me, I think, honestly, all of my 36 years to finally start learning how to just appreciate and value and even enjoy scaling a mountain that can never be scaled, right? Like attempting a project that it's really about trying to do something I can stand behind more than it's about some kind of completist fantasy, right? I need to finish this, finish this, finish this. If the task was always, if the task was always too great to complete, then in a way, my starting at it and on it shows me and unfolds for me what it is that I was supposed to be able to access in it. It's in a way more about my navigating through it than it is actually about my completing it. So, I mean, but here we really do have a very sophisticated communication and teaching about resilience, right? About stick-to-itiveness, right? About what it means to see yourself as committed to something valuable, but also to have the context and the contextualizing you need to be able to place yourself within it, to see yourself as part of something that transcends you, but for you to be a necessary component or for its transcendence, right? It goes beyond you, but it can't go beyond you unless it goes through you. So I think also what we have here is, Rabbi Tarfon beat the marshmallow experiment by thousands of years, right? It says if you learn a lot of Torah, you'll get a greater reward. And know that the boss, right, the master of the work, of your work, is faithful, i.e. that they'll pay you on time, right? They'll pay you appropriately. As we know, I hope we know, the most common form of theft is wage theft, nowadays, at least, right? There's thieves all over us. They're never prosecuted, they're never arrested. But people's wages are garnished and thieved constantly in this world. God, I mean, first of all, it's an Isser Doraisa. The Torah is very clear that that is absolutely forbidden according to the Torah. You're not allowed to hold what is the workers overnight. You cannot preclude them from having what is theirs. Second of all, God is the example of the opposite of that. God is a reliable employer who will pay you your full worth on time. And know, says Rabbi Tarfon, matan scharan shel tzadikim lasid lavai. Know what the remuneration for the righteous will be in the world to come, in the future to come. I.e., resist the need for immediate gratification because it is about contextualizing yourself within doing something that will not be complete, and knowing in a way that the sense of reward will come at the end. Now, different people's beliefs about the afterlife and the like, and how ambiguous that is in Jewish theology aside, I think what we can see in this is a call for us to be able to value the steps as steps, to value the tasks as tasks, to find satisfaction in what it means to be engaged in meaningful work, and to know, though, that there is a seduction that we need to resist of the sense of like the full reward until it's done. That we can't just scarf it all down, right, all those marshmallows, because we want it right now. but rather we need to be measured and meted and moderate. That we need to be able to plug away at this in a way that is not just impressive, but also I would say sustainable. So like, I think it's an important counterpoint to the don't go to sleep, never sleep kind of approach that we saw before from Rabbeinu Yonah. Rather, sleep exactly as much as you need for you to have the rest you need to be able to accomplish the most you can the next day. Right? Because the day is your whole life. It's not really a day. So how are you able to construct a system in which you are meeting your needs such that then you can do what you want to do, what you need to do, what is meaningful to do? Comments, reactions, objections, questions, felicitations?
But it feels dichotomous that the same rabbi in one breath said the boss is like knocking at your door, he's a taskmaster,
Mm-hmm.
and then the boss is very reliable and faithful and will reward you. I mean, I don't disagree with the second
Yeah, you better not.
description. Huh?
I said you better not.
I don't disagree with the second description, but like, why would the same rabbi sort of describe it into what seem like dichotomous ways?
I am vast. I contain multitudes. I mean, Rabbi Tarfon. I don't think modernity invented the notion of like a complex individual. I think Rabbi Tarfon had, in one moment he's talking about one aspect, the romance, right, of overwhelming obsessive work, and on the other hand, I mean, also anxiety-inducing work, right? The master is knocking at the door. The master is insistent, but on the other hand, like he also is here talking about what it means to have a sustainable approach to a task that will always elude your grasp. Secondly, just because the master is insistent doesn't mean the master doesn't pay you on time. It can be two things, right? It can be like a taskmaster, right? A real like work driver. I don't know. I've never had a real boss. You can have a real taskmaster, but on the other hand, right? They also could like just be like really just an intense person who really wants the work to get done, but also they see their own role as equally intense, right? They're going to pay you on time because that's their job, and they need to do their job too. They can't exist in the same way, right? Like, I will not comment on that, Susie. Okay, so let's move on to the Achin, a later commentary on Pirkei Avos. So it says, it's not on you to finish the task. De'af she'malacha merubach de'amran afilu hachi lo sisyoish im loisucha ligmor kulan. It says, even though the work is so vast, as was stated, even so, do not despair if you are not able to finish the entirety of it. So, unclear in a way, like how you're not supposed to despair, but Yachin, I think, recognizes the psychological potential implications of kind of the twinning of these two teachings of Rabbi Tarfon. If the task is so great, right? She'malacha meruba. He's quoting Rabbi Tarfon's other teaching from 215. Even though the work is so great, he says, what this teaching is coming to do is to tell you, yeah, I get that it's like so big. I get that you could never do it. I want you to have the excitement of what it's like to be a teenager, like obsessed with a new project. I don't want you to have the burnout of a 30-year-old millennial, right? Who's doing, who's like spending 15 hours doing work that they hate, right? Like, I want you to have the excitement of what it's like to commit yourself and to throw yourself into something so meaningful and so obsession worthy. I don't want you then to despair, but rather to feel the romance, right? The passion of the awe of what it is to be in a relationship with Torah, with meaningful work, in a way that you recognize that you're just part of something and it's not ever going to get done just with you. So what are ways that we think we can resist despair? How can we contribute to our own sustainable work practices when it comes to our learning, when it comes to the tasks that we need to do in life, whether they feel like drudgery or if we can find them to be drudgery divine, right? How can we resist burnout in our lives? How can we like take Yachin's message seriously? So how can we take that advice seriously? How can we resist burnout?
In the real world, that's really hard. It really
Sure
is
is.
hard.
All the more reason then
Having
to ask that
ha-
question.
having a work-life balance is hard, but that's what you need. You
Mm-hmm.
need a work-life balance. You need to know when it's enough. You've given enough. If you give any more, you're going to harm yourself. It's okay. You got to go home now. It'll take care of itself. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And eat okay, sleep okay, go for walks, talk to friends. You've got to have like a balanced life.
Mm-hmm.
You can't push yourself in a fanatical way. But it's not so easy to do in the work world. It really isn't.
Right, and it's increasingly hard. With
Yeah.
what's called work creep, right? Like, work from home has been very convenient for many people, but on the other hand, it means that there's a blurring between your work life and your home life. I know that there's a law in process to make it harder or illegal to be emailed for work things after a certain hour. I think the bill needs. I can't comment any more on that, but there's like more bills being introduced to help in a way. Like you're saying like you have to have work-life balance. Sure, but like if your boss is not letting you have a work-life balance, then that's pretty darn hard. So that we need like the law, or we need if you want, you can't always have the social capital you need to tell your boss like I'm going home now. Sorry, right? Like sometimes they're going to say fine, you're fired. So I think on one line we need protections to make sure that people can have the life that they deserve, right? A life in which they're able to recharge, a life in which they're not just subject to others' whims. But when it comes to, let's say, like outside of our work or our jobs, how can we have a sense of what it means to be sustainable in our learning lives, right? Or our davening lives, in our religious work? Comment in the chat. Definitely agree with that comment. I think it's very important for us to realize that our learning is not just something that is a responsibility, but also I think it's important for people at every level, whether you are learning in kollel, right? You're like in the PhD level of like Torah learning, or you're like learning your Aleph Beis, right? You're like starting at the very beginning. That everyone is part of the same task. We're all part of what it means to be learning Torah. In some ways, in a way, we're all on equal footing. If the task is infinite, then being at point A is no different than being at point Z because it's infinite. Any measure is nothing before it. But B, also to see ways in which we are accomplishing something. If you learn a letter of Torah, the Kabbalists are very serious about how valuable and holy and mystical each of the letters are. So like you might just think of yourself as learning a sound associated with a certain written symbol, but on the other hand, you're also unlocking something that you might not even be fully aware of yet. So it's really important, I think, and also to encourage ourselves, right? To have what Rabbi Nachman especially calls his chazkas, right? To have self-encouragement, self-emboldening, right? To be able to recognize and value and give ourselves kudos, right? To give ourselves encouragement for what it is we're able to accomplish. Not as the egotistical, like vision of like I've done it all, but rather as the healthy ego of pride, right? Like appropriate pride in contributing towards and progressing in a journey that really will be, extend not just through your life but beyond it. That every way we're able to progress in that journey is valuable and meaningful.
It's interesting
Yeah.
to see ourselves also as like it's part of the flow.
Mm-hmm.
Like we can look at like, okay, so like hundreds of years, our ancestors in Poland or whatever, wherever in Morocco, were also doing this. They were also studying Torah. And it gets, the flame is passed, the torch is passed. You're on to the next generation. I mean, I could never be, for my dad, relaxation would be sitting down with a blood of Gemara and just studying. I could never be at that level. But that encouragement and knowing, he studied, his father studied, his father's father. It's just, we're all in this flow. We're all part of this, what it means to be a Jew from generation to generation to generation.
Yeah. Rabbi, the Rav, Rabbi, Joseph Ber Soloveitchik, famously described, like, when he would open a Talmud, he would say, like, I'm not just by myself learning, although, the classic way to learn is literally with somebody else, but he, you reach a certain level, you just want the company of your own thoughts. But he's saying, but I'm not just with myself. I open, I start talking to Rashi, and then the Tosfos introduce themselves, and then the Meiri introduces himself, all these people I'm conversing with, in the chain of generations. And on one level, like, you can say, oh, fine, but that's like another, fancy pants rabbi saying that he has access to something that maybe I don't. But rather, I think actually he's saying, I am part of, like Lauren was gesturing to, I'm part of something bigger than me. I'm dependent on what others have done, and I am contributing what I am contributing, but it's not everything. I'm contributing what I have. And I think that's true for everybody. Right? That's true for everybody, that all of us have unique perspectives on Torah that are brought out by the magical alchemy of the life that we've lived and the intellectual journeys that we've taken so far, and the way then that catalyzes with with Torah that we learn. So even if you're not opening a Blat Gemara, right, and getting into the Tosfos, like you are Tosfos in your way, right? You are the addition. You are the continuation of the chain of Torah. And the key is to, I think, towards encouragement and towards not burning out, is to realize that your voice is needed and is valued. Yeah, you're contributing towards the panoply of Torah. The Achin further says, and I really love this, like, kind of this coupling of his commentaries. He says, but you're not free to neglect it, to give up on it. He says, Bivadai yishachrarani hakadosh baruch hu milakayim kulan. Don't take your feelings too seriously, such that you say, oh, the work is so great, I could never do it all. Thus, I infer from that feeling, that God doesn't want me to do it. Because if you do, then actually you're sinning. HaKadosh Baruch Hu yimchol li, God forgive me. Aval HaKadosh Baruch Hu chafetz shetaseh b'melacha harbe hazos kol shebiacholtecha. You've missed the point. The point isn't that God wants you to complete the whole thing, but rather that God wants you to do exactly what you can do. That's why you're here. You're not an accident. You have your exact capacity. You have your exact potential, because it is exactly what you can produce that is what is wanted and needed. It's an incredibly subjectivizing, but in that way equalizing, vision of what it means to contribute. It doesn't matter if I'm at point Z and Mr. X is at point A. If not Mr. X, then we wouldn't have exactly what Mr. X is doing. And if Mrs. Z is where she's at and learning, at a different madrega, she's contributing what she's contributing. The point is that God has put us here to contribute towards something beyond ourselves. And it's the contribution, it's the effort that matters, in a way, more than the accomplishment. Because the final completion is beyond anyone's grasp. So it can't be the accomplishment. Rather, actually, it must be the effort that we put in, and what it is that we, in our particularity, right, who we are, exactly who we are and who we can be, what we are and what we can do. That is what is wanted and needed. The Meiri, the medieval Spanish commentator who wrote a very clear and lucid Hebrew commentary on the Gemara that was lost for many years. It was only recovered, in non-fragmentary form in the 20th century. It's a very special commentary, and if anyone is learning Talmud and wants to kind of kick it into higher gear, this is a great Rishon to work with because the language is very clear and his thinking is very clear. So, like in your post-Rashi Talmud learning life, Meiri is a good place to go. Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. So it's not on you to finish the task, the work. Klemar, shelo tamar, eich atchil b'davar shelo uchal avoy ad tachlito. You shouldn't say, how can I start something whose end I cannot grasp? Right? Kind of similar to what the Achin is saying. Don't say to yourself that starting something you can't finish is worthless, is not valuable. Rather, she'eincha mechuyav lavo ad tachlito, because you're not obligated to reach its end. Vila asos beyeser hayacholes, and to do more than what you can. You're not obligated to do more than what you can. A really, I think, importantly therapeutic point element that's often missed. I think I've mentioned this before. I've kind of came to this conclusion through learning with you, lovely people, that it's not obligatory to transcend yourself, but it is required to try. But here, the Meiri is kind of undergirding that and also in some way limiting that by saying it would be unfair and unjust if God expected you to do something that you could not do. Rather, there is something greater than what anyone can do that should humble the greatest of us. And thus it should unconvince us, disconvince us, that the point of this is to complete the task. Rather, the point of it is it's a radical revaluing of everything that's not complete, right? It's actually, the point of it is to do what you can. That is what is needed. V'chein im tomar eini muchan lechach. And if you say to yourself, I'm not ready for this, I can't do it. Lechach tzarich al kol panim shetishtadel kefi ma shetuchal. You must, nevertheless, strive, toil, work towards doing as much as you can. She'eincha ben chorin lihibatel mikol v'kol. Mima shenotzeret aleha. Because you are not free to neglect or lihibatel, to count yourself out, to negate yourself. You're not free to treat yourself like nothing because you can't do everything. You're not allowed to treat yourself like nothing because you can't do everything. Strive, work, but feel the satisfaction of what it is to work hard, rather than the disappointment of what it's like to not finish. Working out, I actually think, like, do you even lift, bro? Like, working out, I think is actually a really good muscle for this. Why? There's no end to working out. I guess there is in a way. You reach your personal maximum, right? There's some people, you're never going to be able to lift 1,000 pounds. Fine, whatever. But the point of working out is actually growth from the inside. You get stronger as you do it. It's about growing. It's about growing in strength. It's about accomplishing. It's about moving towards, past, beyond what you thought you could do, and then finding out what else you can do. There's something athletic in Torah learning. There's something athletic in righteous activity. There's something athletic in these things because it is, I think, we're in an age that I think tells us in some ways that that boundary line needs to be backed away from, that when you feel a limit, you need to recede from it. And I think, if your body is telling you a very clear lesson, your soul is telling you a very clear lesson, then you need to listen to that. But I also want us to try to find the safe, encouraging, supported ways that we can take these kinds of risks of seeing actually where else or how much farther we could go. But not in a way, God forbid, that leads us to burnout, to relapse, to something like that. But rather to grow from the inside out, to expand ourselves, to progress with something that we can never fully accomplish. Schar tov mima sheshamur lecha im ma'at v'im harbe. Regardless, he says, and this is really important, regardless, there is reward waiting for you. Whether you're a makdimak or whether you are a humble person. Whether you were able to do as much as you thought you could or not, it will be valued in the end. It is a beautiful coupling, I find, in this commentary of the Be'eri, a dialectical coupling of radical comfort with a radical challenge. Someone pushing you to try as hard as you can because they're telling you what exactly you have is what I want. And if you're able to do X, wonderful. If you're able to do Z, wonderful. Whatever you do is what I want. The taskmaster is insistent, but not punitive. Imagine someone, like a very, honestly, it's actually interesting how working out is actually a very good analogy. A really good personal trainer, right? Pushing you to reach your limit and blow through it. But also with an attentive patience when it comes to what your body needs to replenish itself, smoothies and acai bowls and green juices or whatever, right? The point is that the body is a system that thrives on challenge but needs its rest. Right? Our souls are the same. And I want from this kind of, let's say, this paean to work, right? This theology of work that Pirkei Avot is giving us, that Rabbi Tarfon is giving us today, to be something that charges us, that encourages us to try something new, to keep on progressing in our lives, but also gives us a very strong image of God as appreciative and valuing, not just when we're able to succeed, but also when we're not. Because what God really wants from us is to try. And sometimes you can't, and that's normal. And sometimes you really can, and that's great. So yeah, Susie, I think, like a lot of the way that the commentators are taking this as an analogy or allegory about Torah learning. But the Meiri is not specific about that, and I think in our readings in general, I'm saying on one level, we have Torah learning, another level, prayer, doing mitzvot, or let's say like other things that Judaism asks us to do, Torah asks us to do. But also I would say, in a more Hasidic, mystical dimension, the more generic meaning of mitzvah as good deeds, ways that we're able to apply ourselves in our lives generously, diligently, towards others' well-being, to contribute towards the well-being of the world, right? All this is work as well. So I would say yes, yes, and yes. And this is actually kind of how I take this teaching of the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, right, who I said before is this like very powerful ascetic exemplar of somebody who just like learned their whole life, feet in the ice bath, etc. real like Zen master kind of rabbi. He says, duh. Know that that the reward is waiting for the righteous at the end of the days. He's quoting Exodus, but also the commentary on Exodus, the Midrash on it, saying, so that your days will be lengthened. Actually, it's the reward you get for respecting your parents. That's why there's the famous Talmudic story about how like father tells his son to go shoo away the birds from the nest, to take the shoo the mother bird away, takes the eggs, and then son falls and dies. And says those are the two mitzvahs in which you're saying your days will be lengthened: respecting your parents and shooing away the mother bird. And yeah, it's like this very famous, scandalous challenge to our theodicy. Anywho, says so your days will be lengthened. And know then that, like, what does that really mean? It doesn't mean that you'll live for a long time, said the rabbis, but rather the Midrash says, Ba'olam shekulu aruch, in the world, the age, the eon, in which everything is long, i.e., a time a time without time, a time beyond time, the world to come. So, K'moshe Kasuv is Vatischak liyom acharon. That's what the Gra adds in. That's a line that we see actually in Zmiros and in songs, that you will laugh on the last day. I took this as it's similar to the Midrash, the Gemara story of Rabbi Akiva that we see about Tisha B'Av. He's walking on the Temple Mount, and jackals, coyotes, hyenas, scavenging animals are running around because it's a ruin. It's a rune, and he starts laughing. They're like, why are you laughing? Jackals are running around. He says, because it's a sign that redemption is coming, he says. You will laugh on the last days. I take this to be, though, like a radical ownership of your time. That, especially when it's hard right now, you're able to redefine how to relate to it because you're able to remove yourself and see the larger, longer picture. The days when all things are long. You're able to see that things extend beyond this moment, extend beyond the day. The day is short, and that feels stressful. But on the other hand, it's descriptive. The days are short. No work can ever get done in one day. Not really. Not valuable work. Meaningful work takes more than just a day. You'll laugh on the last day because you're able to see, maybe actually imitatio Dei, like God, you'll see the end from the beginning. And you're able to see the joy that will come when you are able to reach that day. So I want to conclude with this teaching from Reb Nosson Sternhartz, who was Rabbi Nachman's main disciple. Distilling and translating Rabbi Nachman's teachings, he says, Gam belimud Torah, tzrichin bechinas histapkus. Says, even in learning Torah. But again, when we say learning Torah, I think we really mean, obviously learning Torah. But he says, even in learning Torah, something that seems obvious in other parts of our lives, but even in learning Torah, even when we are approaching this infinitely valuable thing, this infinitely valuable work, however we see that in our lives, we need still a dimension of patience, contentment, enoughness, right? Maspik, right? That's the root here. Maspik, enoughness. Ki lifamim mebalbel sa'adam masharat selomod yoser midai. Sometimes you get confused. You're your eyes are crossing. You can't pay attention. You're just distracted. You're hyper, whatever. Right? You can't progress the way you want to right now. Ki roa sheyesh harbe lemod v'rotze lemod kol haTorah al regel achas. Because you see how much there is to do, how much there is to learn, and you want to get it all done on one foot. The convert comes to Shammai, says, teach me the Torah on one foot. Comes to Hillel, teach me Torah on one foot. Right? Hillel says, what is hateful to you, do not do unto your fellow person. Right? He gives him a pithy line, but then he says, the rest is commentary, go and learn it. It's impossible to get it all done on one foot, and the earlier you learn that, the better. And because of that passion, right? You want to get it all done. You want it done right now. You become confused. You become mixed up. Lifamim misbatel ayedezev eno lamed klal. And sometimes you are misbatel. You are, right? Lihibatel. You remove yourself. You shut it down. You regard yourself as not enough. And you don't learn at all. Al kain sarich. Thus, one must. Shigam Torah. Even in Torah. But again, even in Torah implies all the more so, and there are other aspects of our lives too, that we find this intuitive. Yelo b'chinas istapkus. You need to feel like it's been enough. Like you've done enough. Like you've accomplished something. Just because you haven't finished it doesn't mean you haven't done nothing. You've done something, and that's valuable. Ki lo alecha hamlacha likmor. Lo alecha hamlacha likmor. As Chazal say. It's not on you to finish it, but it's not fair to you to regard what you have done as not enough. Rather, we need to hold both in our heads and in our hands at the same time, and in our hearts. Lo alechem l'chalik more. It's not on you to finish it, but rather God wants us to try to do as much as we can to give it a real, honest effort. And it's really the effort in which the value is held than in the result. A big yashkoach to everybody. I hope this contributes to your own revived recommitment to Torah learning and to other valuable work that we do in our lives. And we can give ourselves the encouragement and the appreciation that we need to value each step as valuable in its own right, and to keep on moving forward. Bigash koach. I am going to use this opportunity to say we're not going to have class Parsha Chat on Wednesday evening because I will be having a boys' night out with my dad and my brother. So that'll be fun, but I will not be available. I apologize. But I hope to see you at Shul 7 p.m. Friday evening and 9:30 a.m. Shabbos morning. And then I'll see you bright and early, 7:30 next Monday for Pirkei Avot. Have a great week. Shavua Tov. Get working.